She comes to us as a former Fairfax County Public Schools special education teacher. She is an amazing author. We do have her books in our library, so if you are interested in any of those, we would love to help you check those out. And she is currently president of Educational Connections Tutoring. And so we're very happy to have her. Welcome, Ann, and thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for having me. It's always great to work with the Parent Resource Center. The way you support parents is really fabulous, and I feel grateful to be a part of it. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about kids that are zoomed out. We'll talk about some strategies to get our kids focused, engaged, and motivated, even our reluctant ones, because this isn't easy in the time of virtual learning. So before we get started, as Mary Beth said, you have a chat feature, and I would love to see what is on your mind tonight. What are some of the issues that your kids are experiencing? If you could throw that into the chat, that would be terrific. All right, talking over the teacher, okay, online all the time. Reluctant to talk and to speak up, staying focused the whole day. Oh, those are really helpful. Thank you so much. And I know we have a lot more. So let's touch base on all of those things tonight. Another mom just said disengaged, because I know that we're all feeling stress at this time with our kids. Many of the things that we talk about tonight are also going to be an ebook that I put together for you, and it's called 6 Tips for Smoother at-Home Learning, even when you're dreading it. And you can get that very simply by just texting 55444 and the word virtual. Also, as Mary Beth mentioned, I will take time at the end to answer questions. We'll have a Q&A session. But if you have a question that I don't get to, or it's something personal in nature, please feel free to email me. Email is the best way to contact me at Ann, A-N-N, @EC Tutoring. And also, my website has tons of information. We post blogs there regularly, information on our services. It's a great resource, and you can find that at ectutoring.com. So, all right, let's get started. And thank you, everyone, for sharing everything that's going on in your homes. We're going to talk this evening about 4 main things. Number 1, the difficulty behind virtual learning. And it might be different than what you're thinking that it is. We'll discuss the 8 executive function skills, why they're so important for school success, and why our kids are really struggling with them right now, and what we can do to help. We'll discuss opening the dialogue with our children so that we're not always telling them what to do, but hopefully that they can start to think ahead and solve their own problems. And then lastly, and I think at this time it's probably the most important thing, strengthening relationships with our kids. All right, so as I mentioned, sorry about that. Things have changed so much in the past 9 months. If you could think back to March and all the months before that, it seemed so simple. Our kids went to school. They were sitting in front of their teacher, and their teacher could tell if our kids were understanding the information or they weren't, if they were paying attention and if they weren't. And if they weren't, she could redirect them. She could tap their shoulder. If they were struggling with the information, she could take a small group aside, maybe ask if they wanted to stop by at study hall, meet for a lunch bunch, or even say after school for extra help. But our new reality is this. It's the same amount of kids and the same one teacher, but now they're all in the Zoom room. And this is really the problem. It's not as much the platform of virtual learning that I believe is the problem. I believe it's really that our kids don't have that personal touch they used to get from their teacher. And that's one thing that kids crave. We all crave that human interaction. And put on top of that, they're missing their friends, and it's kind of like a perfect storm. So in my practice, I talk to parents every day, and I feel like I'm kind of in this unique position that I talk to parents from Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Arlington, DC, Maryland. We serve kids throughout the whole area. And the problems are pretty common really across every district. Kids are feeling lost in a large Zoom room class. And as many of you answered when I asked what's on your mind tonight, many of you said they are just not paying attention. It's so easy for them to zoom out when they really should be attending to instruction. Also, teachers use technology differently. And I mentioned in a traditional classroom, a teacher could pull aside a small group and work with them, and the other kids, she could just kind of look over her shoulder and make sure they were on task. But that's harder to do in a Zoom room. Some teachers are a little better at it than others, and they can use breakout rooms more efficiently, but not all have that capability. Furthermore, teachers can't always judge, are our kids doing other things when they shouldn't be? It's hard to know, especially if they have their video off. And when kids are distracted, they're not paying attention, they often get behind, and they're really unwilling to ask for help. It seems so easy to us. We say, go ask your teacher for help. She'll re-explain it to you. But our kids don't want anything to do with it. That's embarrassing to them. They don't want to seem different from all of the other students. Virtual learning is just plain old hard. And to be honest, it's not developmentally appropriate, especially for our youngest learners. Our kids in elementary school, their brains are not ripe for sitting in front of a screen for 7 hours. So it's not just that they're not paying attention, their brains may not be capable of it for most of the day. You throw ADHD on top of that, and our kids, these are our kids that are having the most difficulty. I remember, this is probably 20 years ago, a psychologist said to me, ADHD is really a disorder of motivation. And I thought about that, and I'm like, you know what? You're kind of right. It is the disorder of motivation, because when all these things are hard for you, we'll talk about all these things in a minute, it's so easy to lose motivation. It's easy to see why kids don't want to do these things. They're just plain hard. And even those with weak executive function skills, first of all, everybody with ADHD has weak executive function skills, but not everybody with weak executive function skills actually has a clinical diagnosis of ADHD. But honestly, it doesn't matter. If you see your child struggling with the things that people mentioned in the chat, it's likely they do have some issues with executive function. So we're going to talk about those tonight. So here are the 8 executive functions. And let me just kind of touch on each one very quickly, because I want to narrow it down in just a moment. But here's the first one. Inhibition. One mom said, my child's doing other things and it's not learning. They found other things online to do during class. That's an inhibition issue. Can you put away distractions and focus on what you have to do? Initiation. Can you make yourself get started? Can you initiate a task even when you don't want to do? Shifting. Can you put down your Xbox and start your math? Emotional control. Are you able to get through the day without a breakdown? Can you get through your math homework without, feeling like there's a ton of drama in the house? Working memory, keeping things in your head all at the same time. That's working memory. Working memory isn't really short-term or long-term memory. It's juggling lots of things in your head at one time. Planning and organization. Can you plan ahead for due dates that are later on? Materials. Can you organize your materials? Not just physical materials like paper, but also our electronic materials. And then lastly, and this is the hardest executive function skill, it's the last one for the brain to develop, and it's called self-monitoring. It's basically another term for self-awareness. As you go throughout the day, are you able to judge, am I doing a good job? What can I improve? What do I need to change? That's a self-monitoring ability. So curious. I'd love to go back to the chat. Which executive function, if you could only pick one, is the most troublesome for your child? Type that into the chat, please. Thank you. Stacy already said inhibition. Thanks for that. Emotional control, self-monitoring, inhibition, planning and organization, another planning and organization, working memory, initiation, inhibition. Lots of planning and organizations. Okay, more initiations. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing that. All right, so what I've decided to do tonight is to think about some of these in the context of virtual learning and boil them down to ones that I see are affecting kids the most that we work with, and then talk a little bit about parenting strategies that can make a difference. All right, so let's start first with the issue of procrastination. Anytime we see a problem with our kids, there's likely an underlying executive function skill that hasn't fully developed. So if you see procrastination, it's often not willful. It's often not just that your child doesn't want to do the work, or that they just hate math. It's honestly that they can't muster the energy and the strength and break it down to something that's so simple to get started. So what do you do about that? We'll talk about that in two different ways. Procrastination can be in the now, like I need to start this math right now, or it can be I have something due in 2 weeks, I need to plan ahead. Let's put that second one aside and just focus on you need to get started right now, that procrastination. All right, first of all, let's talk about timers. If you've seen me speak before, you know I'm a huge fan of timers. I love them. I think they're fabulous. I think there's so many ways kids can use timers. And in fact, I've used them for kids from kindergarten to college. In fact, I'm working with a college student and we're putting together an executive function video series. And her part of it, because I found that kids don't always want to hear from somebody my age. They want to hear from somebody cooler and definitely hip. So she's putting together these super short videos of like 3 minutes on different strategies kids should master in middle and high school to be ready for college. And one of the videos, she spends the whole time talking about different ways to use timers. And I found that interesting that she still uses timers in college. Now, she uses timers on her phone, but what I would recommend is physical timer. These are better. It just prevents kids from going down the rabbit hole of checking text messages or going online. So this one is the time timer. I like it because it helps kids understand elapsed time with the red disc moving. So here's how you do it. First, you're going to have to do this with your child, and you're going to set their age +1. So let's say you have a 10-year-old. You're going to set the timer for 11 minutes, and you say to your child, all right, I want you to get started on your math, and all I want you to do is work as hard as you can, as best you can, and focus as much as you can for just 11 minutes, and when the timer goes off, you can take a quick break or you can keep on going. Most times kids can keep on going, but it's just that initiation of getting started that's so hard. Now, if you have a child where you think you've tried this before and it's just hard to get them in the mode of using a timer, you might actually set it twice. So setting it twice means you set it for 5 minutes before you're actually going to use the timer strategy. So you say to your child, look, I'm going to set the timer for 11 minutes in 5 minutes. So this is your buffer time to put down what you're doing and get ready to start your math. So then you set it for 5 minutes and then later 11. What I found the most success with kids, and even my own kids too, is I will teach them how to use the timer. If I give them a timer, they don't automatically know. They won't use it correctly. So I'll teach them how to use the timer and I'll model it myself. Okay, I say to myself, I'm going to work as hard as I can, best as I can, focus as much as I can. I share with them that self-talk. And so they start to get the narrative of this is what they say to themselves when they use a timer. And then I'll leave it in their study area so that they have access to it and they can use it when they need to. So that's the executive function skill of it, initiation, and one way to tackle procrastination. All right, let's look at the times of day that this is going to be best used. Here's the thing. We all experience these peaks and valleys of our energy and our attention through the day. We know that kids get their best test scores in the morning. We know that doctors make fewer mistakes in the morning because people are more vigilant, meaning they can bat away distractions, inhibition, and they can focus on what they need to do. They're more alert, they're more attentive, and they're in the best mood up until about lunchtime. This is when they reach their peak. But after that, pretty much every human being experiences a downturn. And then by 3 o'clock, they're in this trough. And a trough is bad. That's when you don't feel like doing anything. We reach for a cup of coffee. That's when our kids are getting out of school and they don't want to do anything. They're in a bad mood. This is not the time we want to approach them about a conversation or about a timer strategy because it won't work. Later in the day, it gets better and we all tend to recover. But if we want them to use a strategy that might be a little tricky for them at first, we want to introduce it so it's something that they do in the morning, because that's when it's gonna work best. All right, let's look at the next executive function skill. Planning an organization. This is when our kids are unaware of deadlines. I'm not sure if you've seen this in your house, but we see this with a lot of kids that we work with. They just don't realize they have a test the next day, or, oh shoot, they had 3 missing assignments and they didn't know about them. It's easy to think you just don't care. You didn't want to do this. But in all reality, many times they were just completely caught off guard. So what do you do if this is an executive function weakness for your child? I think one of the most important things we can do as parents is to help our kids plan ahead. Our kids are in the now. All they think about is what they're doing right now and not what they have to do a week from now or even the next day. That's why I love Sundays and Mondays. I call this the magic of Mondays, but really it works on Sundays. So you pick one of these 2 days, and it's a time where you sit down with your child for about 20 minutes and you say, let's think about the week ahead. What do you have coming up? If you have a kid like mine who just didn't want anything to do with me, when I asked that question, I would just still set aside that time and we'd have 20 minutes every Sunday night where we all just kind of looked at our calendars and thought ahead for the week. And I never micromanaged it. He would go on Whipple Hill, which was the platform he used, and he would kind of look ahead to see what he had going on. So you can do this with your kids too. All it is asking a couple of important questions. What do you have coming up, and how will you plan that out? And you might just ask them the question. Now, sometimes kids are willing to work with you, and if they are, great. If they're not, it could be that maybe an executive function coach, a tutor, maybe if your child has an IEP, you can ask their teacher if they'll help on Fridays to look at the week ahead, or on Monday or Tuesday to look at the week ahead. It could be a college student down the street, it doesn't matter. But many kids need help with this. They need to practice it with somebody else. So it could be that they create a list of all the things that they have coming up. It could be they use Google Calendar and they populate their due dates into the calendar. That's ideal. But to be honest, many of our kids are not list makers. I personally like lists. I like checking off lists. It gives me that squirt of dopamine, and it makes me feel good. But kids don't necessarily like lists like adults do. So for them, they tend to do better with a visual. So the visual can be a whiteboard that they just write out what they have to do. It could be sticky notes that they write down the things that they have to do and any reminders. This is one from the college student that I mentioned. She took a picture of hers and she's sharing with the kids in a video. This is how she thinks ahead to her day and what's coming up. Also, because we're at a time in January where there's only about 2 weeks left of school in this quarter, if you go online with your child, or your child does, and you see there's lots of stuff they haven't done, this might be a good time to ask the teacher, does all this really have to be done? Is there anything that can be forgiven? I do know that grading policies have changed, and there is more assignment forgiveness, but I would ask that question if it seems overwhelming. So here's a couple of examples of what that looks like. Here's a whiteboard from a student. This is an app called Dayboard. Dayboard is an app that allows anybody, students or adults, to type in what they have to do into Dayboard, and anytime they open up a browser, open up Chrome extension for Chrome as an example, their to-do list will populate. And that's really helpful because it's always in front of you. You always see it. Here's also an example of a student planner. If you've struggled with your child on using a planner in the past, honestly, I wouldn't fight over this anymore. If they haven't used it in the past, they're probably not gonna in the future, and you may not have success in making them do it. Instead, something that's more visual might help them more. And that's why I like Post-it notes and whiteboards, because kids tend to like them more too. All right, here's the next one. The executive function skill is materials organization. It manifests itself in kids not turning in their work because they don't know where stuff is. Their teachers may post their assignments or their work on different platforms. Some teachers might post in Blackboard. Some put the information in Google Classroom. Some have their own site or their own way of doing things with kids. Other kids in school districts might use Canvas. But what I found for many kids, especially in Fairfax County, there is no one place where every teacher says, here's what you have to do, and here are all the associated documents. It doesn't work like that. It feels almost like a part-time job to many parents, figuring out all the places that all this stuff lives. So one of the first things we do when we work with kids is we create a site map for every subject. And this is something you might want to consider with your child. So we figure out, all right, for English, where does your teacher post the assignments? Where are the documents that you need to use each time? Where does she post, the worksheets that you have to fill out or the rubrics? And then lastly, how do you turn that work in? Those three things. Where are the assignments? Where is the work associated with it? And how do you turn it in? And we create this little site map for every class that they have. Because although, it seems like at this time of year, kids should know these things, they don't always. So putting it in, a list, if your kid likes a list, but usually it's more of a flow chart, like a graphic organizer, so they have that in front of them all the time. So if you say, tell me about English, they can be able to look at English and go and figure out where that stuff is. As executive function coaches, when kids don't have a site map, we found, we'll ask kids about things and they'll poke around, they'll try to think, oh, where is that again? And when they finally find it, it was already due, or it's due the next day and they're unprepared. So this really prevents that. Okay, here's the next executive function skill. It's inhibition. And inhibition, as I mentioned before, means batting away distractions and paying attention to what you have to do. Usually it's your teacher. This was a big issue for many of our students in March. And in fact, when we started working with kids online back in March and still now, I was super worried about it. And I thought, oh my gosh, our kids have a hard time paying attention when we're sitting next to them. For 22 years, we drove to kids' houses and helped them one-to-one like that. What's it going to be like when they're online? And over the many months, I found that actually it's super different than I thought it would be, because most of the kids we see, they struggle in this large Zoom classroom of 25 kids, but they do beautifully with just me or one of the tutors. And the reason is that it's that personal touch, it's the relationship. They're often really grateful, they're motivated, they're able to focus. And part of it is that, we try to make it as engaging as possible. So it's tactile too. We'll use whiteboard drop-ins. We do all kinds of things so that kids are actively engaged. When kids are in a large Zoom room and they're not actively engaged, it's because this executive function skill of inhibition is rearing its head. So they find other things to distract them. However, if you give a child a piece of paper and a pencil to take notes, it actually makes things better because now they have something to do and it's not going down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos. Even better yet is using Doodle Notes. And Doodle Notes are a really cool graphic organizer that I found to be super helpful. At the bottom right, you can see blank Doodle Notes. And these are basically templates that help you organize your ideas. So you can see some completed ones in these drawings. But basically, when kids have to listen to their teacher and they jot down notes, it's awesome because later on with Doodle Notes, they'll go back and they'll make them colorful. They'll put pictures to help them remember. And I found that when kids do this, it, number one, helps them pay attention. But number two, because it looks nice and it's interesting and attractive, they're much more likely to go back to those notes and study them again later when they have a test. Other things that help with inhibition are really chunking and movement. So let me first start with chunking. When kids think about their school day of, oh my gosh, my school day is 8 to 3, it feels dreadful for many of our students. It just feels like this one big blob of time, like it's a lot. But in all reality, if our kids think about it as pieces, parts of the day, it helps it go by a lot faster. So what we help kids do is find their schedule, print it out, and then chunk it up. So let's say they have math from 9 to 10, and they have English from 10 to 11. It doesn't feel like, oh, this is 2 hours, but now this is just a 1 hour period of time. And we'll print out that schedule for them. We'll go over it with them, and then we might even ask them, where do you want to do these things? And for kids that are super fidgety, having multiple places to work is helpful. So I wouldn't let them move around 3 times during math class, but it's okay if they want to do math here, and then they go to their reading class here, and they have different workstations, especially if they're standing. That helps kids certainly. And also during those break times, getting kids outside is super helpful. So we might not even say, you know, go outside. We might say, let's take a walk. You know, you don't even have to talk to me. You can listen to your music and I'll listen to my podcast. Or, hey, I put your bike in the driveway. You can ride your bike or you can walk the dog. What do you want to do? Giving kids choices and really encouraging to get them out helps them with inhibition, because it really has their blood flowing and they're better able to pay attention. All right, here's another one. It's the executive function skill of working memory. And this is, you know, an issue when we see that our kids are forgetful. So the behavior we see is forgetfulness, but actually the executive function is working memory. I see working memory being taxed all the time by kids, especially when they say things to me like, oh, I can totally remember all these assignments. I don't need to write it down, Mrs. Dolin. The truth is, they can't remember all these things. Nobody can remember that they have to do 12 things. It's just not possible. But our kids are unrealistic. Sometimes they're very optimistic about their own abilities. So I found that having some way for them to get that information out is super helpful. Now, as parents, we often want to help with working memory by giving our kids lots of reminders. So for example, if we say to our child, hey, be sure to get your skates, get your pads, don't forget your water bottle. Oh, and remember that permission slip before your hockey practice. Chances are your child will maybe remember the permission slip, but nothing else because it's too much. Or they might remember the most important thing, like their skates. Instead, if we can help with a verbal reminder, a visual reminder, that's even better. Visual reminders can be Post-it notes, they can be little checklists, but they have to be changed up from time to time. Many parents will say, oh, I tried checklists and they worked okay at first, but then they didn't work, so they don't work at all for me. And that's actually not true. First of all, if you want to have a checklist of maybe the 4 things your child has to bring to hockey practice every time, or the 3 things your child needs to do before they sit down for virtual school every day, it needs to be in writing and it needs to be simple. It can't really be more than 3 things, I found. 4, you kind of don't always have great results. And the checklist needs to be changed up from time to time. So let's go back to the example of hockey practice. If it's on a white piece of paper by the door, that's probably going to work out great for about a week, and then it will stop working. The reason is your brain makes the piece of paper blend in with the paint, and it doesn't look like a checklist anymore. It all looks like the wall. So you have to change it up. You might have to put it on top of a pink piece of paper and move it to another place on the board. You might put stickers on it. You have to make it look different. That's what I call sparkleizing. So we want to do that so that our kids remember these things and don't have to have it in their mind and taxing their working memory. For little kids, this is an example of a star chart for little kids. I would say this is what not to do. It's too many things. Kids are not ever going to do all these things. It's setting kids up for failure because it's too much. So instead, you really want to limit tasks to maybe 3 or 2. For example, you might say, hey, this morning you have 2 things to do. Or not this morning, but today you have 2 things to do. These are the only things you're going to be responsible for doing. You need to be online on time, and you need to clean up your workspace at the end of the day. Or it may be things they have to do in the morning. They need to brush their teeth, they need to get dressed, and they need to have breakfast. Those 3 things can go on a checklist. That helps with working memory. But how do we actually get our kids to do all of these things? They sound good in theory, but really, can we actually make our kids do these things? The answer is, if we try to make our kids do these things and we tell them what to do, it's probably not going to work. But it could work better if it's more collaborative. So here's how I recommend starting. It's with a conversation, and first with an appointment. So let's say you want to plan ahead. That's your biggest thing. Organization and planning is the biggest executive function skill for your child. And you want to set aside time on Sunday night to look ahead at the week. So you might say to your child, hey, can we talk about school after dinner tonight? How does 7:30 work for you? That way, you're kind of like setting up an appointment with your child. You're not approaching them in the moment when they haven't planned ahead and they realize they have something due. So begin with that appointment and have a conversation. You might even start with the words, I've noticed. These are some of my favorite words. So you might say, I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of things. To me, that sounds a lot better than, hey, you haven't been turning in your work, so I'm going to change things in the house. That feels punitive to kids. And when kids feel like we have the power here and they're down here and there's this big discrepancy, there's this big power shift, kids don't like it and they won't do what we want them to do. But if they feel like we're more of their partner and we are here to help, they're much more likely to narrow that gap. And we may not be on even playing fields, but it's much more doable because it's more collaborative. So you might start with something like, oh, I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of things. And really just listen to your child. You could say, tell me about that. And if they say something like, oh, my teacher gives me too much work, you can just listen and nod and hear what they have to say. And just when kids hear us that we understand, we may not agree with them, but we're listening to them, that means a lot to our students, and they're much more likely to follow through on maybe that Sunday night where they plan ahead with you for 20 minutes. I also love asking powerful questions. This is another way we can get into that collaborative mode with our kids instead of that heavy-handed micromanaging mode. So instead of saying, did you do your homework yet? Or do you have homework? You might ask, for a little kid, are you going to do your math or your spelling first? For older kids, you might say, oh, what's the one thing you want to get accomplished tonight? You can even ask, what are your priorities today? Some kids will answer that, some kids won't. But even if they don't, they're probably going to be thinking about what's important that they get done today. So these are powerful questions, and they really help kids that have that issue with initiation because they procrastinate. It helps them think about what they're going to do. And it can kind of help kids that are feeling anxious, like everything's a big deal, but actually it's not. They have priorities. Here are some other ones. Instead of, did you study for that science test? You might say, what's the first thing you might do to get ready for your science test? It feels a little bit lighter. And also, it's helping kids make it easier. You're just thinking about one thing you can do. Instead of, you better start that history project, it might be, what's something small you can do to get started on your history project? Or, are you ready for your spelling test? You might say, after dinner, would it help if I read the words to you and you wrote them down? Again, it's collaborative mode. What I found doesn't work for kids are why questions. They're just inherently difficult for students. They require lots of critical thinking. So when we say, why didn't you turn your science assignment in? Kids have to think back, okay, well, I forgot that she told me about it, and then I remembered, but I couldn't find it online. And then I went into panic mode. It really requires a lot of critical thinking. And kids see why questions as an affront. They don't like them one bit. So I might avoid why questions because they tend to get us out of that collaborative mode, and instead ask those powerful questions. All right, a couple of other things before we wrap up with the presentation and go to Q&A. And I'd say this is the other big thing we hear when parents call our office looking for help for their kids. One of the things they mention is, first of all, they'll say, my kids are online a lot during the day. I'm not sure if I want online instruction. But it is completely different. And here's the reason. Online instruction where your child is with their teacher, or maybe they're doing a test online, for example, or they're with a tutor or an executive function coach. All those things, reading a book online, produce low levels of dopamine because not all screens are created equal. So these are screens that have low levels of this pleasure chemical called dopamine. But there are other screens that aren't as helpful and they create lots of dopamine. And these are video games and also social media. It could be Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, any of those things that our kids love to do. They produce lots of dopamine in the brain. Now, dopamine is a good thing because it makes us feel good. But when we have too much dopamine all the time, our brain wants more and more. And these receptors in our brain say, oh, give me more of that. So when we say to our kids, hey, get off that game or put Xbox down, and they don't want to do it, it's not because they don't like you or because, they just love video games so much. It's really that this dopamine, their brain on fire, and they just can't see how they can put it down. So what I would recommend with screen time is to think about it as these two different things. Screen time online with learning, reading a book, all those things, and producing low dopamine is one thing. But what we want to try to limit is screen time that's high dopamine. So think of an on-off rule for screen time. You might think of, it's a start time and an end time. It's on and then it's off. So maybe you have an hour for them to be online, and if possible, they go out and do something else. Maybe they go outside for an hour. But having this time to reset is super valuable for our students, and that's what helps them make getting through the day easier because their brain isn't so addicted to screens all the time, and it kind of affects the inhibition on online learning. They're able to focus a little bit more when their brain isn't always flooded with dopamine. So just something to think about, the different types of screen time. These are things that I found to be helpful for kids. These were actually recommended to me by students in the first place. The first one was from a high school student. The second one was from a 7th grader at Robinson Middle. And they both do something similar. A self-control is a Mac app, and then stay focused is a Chrome extension. But they both allow kids to blacklist websites that they deem to be distracting. So this has to do with the executive function skill of self-awareness, of knowing when things aren't going well for you. And if your child knows, oh my gosh, I really need to do better in math, but I'm on YouTube too much during the class, they may say to themselves, I'm going to block YouTube and I'm going to block these 3 other sites so I can pay attention during math. Maybe they just want to focus on math. That's perfect. And so they use one of these blocking sites. And no matter what they do, they can try to restart their computer, or they can even try to disable the app. They cannot get to those websites that they've deemed to be distracting. This is one for phones. I love this one. I use this one myself, and I think it's so great. It's called Forest. And Forest is kind of similar, but it also has a timer, which I love. And there's lots of research about the optimal time to use a timer. So not just for task initiation, but also for, like, if you want to get something longer done, maybe you have an essay to write, for example, or something to study for, really you shouldn't set a timer or have expectations for yourself above 25 minutes. So you set the timer for 25 minutes. on Forest, what happens is you click the app and the screen on the left pops up, and you can set the timer for, say, 25 minutes. And during that time, a tree will grow on your home screen. And if you go to another app outside of Forest, if you minimize Forest and go to Snapchat or you go to Instagram, your tree will start to wither and die. And the app will give you a warning that says, get back to focus. You have 10 seconds. So you have to go back you have to get out of those other apps and focus on what you're doing. And this is something that really helps kids to put down their phone, not go down, again, that rabbit hole of doing too much on devices and getting their work done. So I really love Forest, and it's one that a lot of kids have found success with. But again, it's the hardest executive function skill, so they have to know there's a problem and want to fix it. Ultimately, we want to preserve relationships with our kids, and I think this is the most important thing we can do at this very stressful time. I would encourage parents to dial back expectations. It's okay if our kids don't have the best grades in the world, they don't have straight A's. Ultimately, as parents, we want to focus on our kids just finishing the work and not worry too much about the quality. I think leaving quality up to teachers is perfectly fine. Our goal is to help our kids be ready in the morning, be online, and as much as possible get their work done. But not to micromanage the quality, not to make them do things over so that it's just perfect. Leave that to the teacher, because ultimately, if we take that way of thinking, our relationship with our kids will always be better. And then if we find that we're really, really struggling with our kids and there's tons of friction, get outside help. The Parent Resource Center can help you. They have resources. They work with parents all the time that have these issues. You can hire an executive function coach, a tutor, a high school student. It doesn't matter. If you feel like you're in a battle with your child, it could be that somebody else is going to be better to step in. And it could be the teacher too. You can set up some type of after school type of help as well. All right, so I just wanted to mention the ebook again. If you text 55444 and the word virtual, it will come straight to your inbox, and it's called Smoother Tips for At-Home Learning. All right, Mary Beth, I would love to turn it over to Q&A if that sounds good to you.
Yes, absolutely. So what we'd like everyone to do is, if you have questions for Ann this evening, go ahead and put those in the chat box. And then, Ann, what I'll do is I will read them to you. So we'll go through them as they come along. Okay?
Okay, that sounds great, Mary Beth. Awesome.
Okay. All right. So anything you would like to ask Ann this evening?
And thank you all for contributing before. I see so many good comments about the executive function skills that are most impacting kids.
So, and I will share with everyone, please do go ahead and try and get Ann's ebook. They're fabulous, and highly recommend them. Ann has done that for our other webinars, and they're terrific. All right, we have a question. And so on the initiation timer, if a student works for 11 minutes, how long should the break be before they resume work?
Just a couple of minutes. That's ideal. It doesn't have to be long. And in fact, usually after 11 minutes, kids can keep on going. But going back to the thing I mentioned earlier, the 25 minutes, the research showing that 25 minutes is really an ideal time to do work. That research shows that if you're going to work hard for 25 minutes, your break should be 5 minutes. And then you set the timer again for another 25 minutes. It's called the Pomodoro Technique, and it's a technique from the 80s. And the researcher found that, and really this was for older students and adults, that 4 Pomodoros was the max that humans can deal with. So it went like this: Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. So it's 4 25-minute spurts of working hard to getting something done. And that was really all the brain can handle. So after that, you'd have to have a longer break, probably like, a half hour, it could even be an hour. but any interim break should be about 5 minutes for that longer period of time. And then for just 10 minutes, it should only be a couple minutes.
Okay. All right, our next question from Angelo and Gina. Would you recommend taking phones away from your child? We're talking teenagers, middle and high school, during the virtual school day.
That's tough. You know, it's so much easier to do when you have a younger child. And you might be able to get away with a middle schooler. I think there's nothing wrong with having limits. The entire day might be too much for them. So you might say, look, you know, your phone is in my room from, you know, 8 to 11. So on the breaks, they get their phone back. That seems acceptable. For a high school student, I think it's going to result in a ton of power struggle over the phone. It's really hard to take a phone away from a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old. Some kids may be more compliant than others. So if you think it's not going to be a huge battle with your child, you can try it. But what I would first recommend is, again, setting up that appointment and just bringing up the issue and saying, you know, one at a time, not at the same time. I've noticed the phone is on a lot during virtual learning, and just let them respond. Let them hear what they have to say. And then you might say something like, I'm concerned about it, or I worry that you're not paying attention, or I wonder if there's a better way. And come up with some type of negotiation where they do agree to put the phone maybe in another room. But it's going to be better if they do it, if they have that self-awareness, again, that last executive function to come online, and they either, maybe they put Forest on their phone so they're not, you know, looking at it, or they put it in another room. There's lots of research on putting a phone in another room. That's really the ideal thing. But having it next to them is probably going to be really hard to get them to focus. But again, they have to want to do it, and they have to be able to buy into it. But there should be some negotiation. You should, you know, it can't just be you can have the phone free reign. You're paying the bill. You get some say in it.
Thank you. Ann, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I know you work with a lot of Fairfax County students. Are the Chrome extensions you mentioned something that can be used on FCPS school devices?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't. I'm sorry. I should know that, but I don't.
No, that's okay. Lauren, we'll try and find that out for you. But let us get back to you on that. All right. So the slower pace of virtual learning makes class very boring for this mom's third grader. It is hard to keep him focused when there are so many delays due to technical support issues, interruptions, etc. Do you have any advice for how to keep him engaged?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that is so hard when you're right. You know, I found that with the kids we work with, it's either too slow or too fast. It seems like finding that right pace is difficult. You know, certainly the note-taking idea could work, but if there's nothing going on, I think it's just a really hard battle to fight with kids. And it could be that you let them have a book. You let them have something else to do that's somewhat educational. You know, it's not a video game. It's not their phone. It's not an app on their computer, but it's probably okay to give them something else to do during that downtime. I would do that as a parent if I had a third grader at this point.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. So how do you motivate? How do we motivate kids to take notes during class? This is for a middle schooler.
There's a couple of things you can do. Number one, you could show them Doodle Notes and ask them if this could work for them, and go ahead and print out a couple. You can get them for free. There's a really good website called doodlenotes.org, and that has all the information on the research behind it and some free templates. And then one of my favorite websites is called Teachers Pay Teachers, and these are all teacher designed worksheets and fun things for kids to do. And there's also a number of pages of free Doodle Notes on that site as well. But I might ask, you know, you can even start with, this might work for you, this might not. What do you think? Would it be worth a try? And going to the website with them, printing them out, see if they'll use it. But the other thing you can do is to talk to the teacher about it and say to the teacher, I would really love for my child to take notes. Is this something you can discuss with the kids? Because when it comes from the teacher and not from mom and dad, it's so much more meaningful. So if the teacher says, sure, that's not a problem. And she says to all the kids, all right, everybody, we're going to work on taking notes today. Your child's going to be much more inclined to do it. So I would definitely approach the teacher. It's a skill that kids have to have. They have to have it in high school, and they have to have it in college. And really, middle school is the proving ground for those advanced grades.
Absolutely. So another parent has asked, what can I do when my 3 children get distracted when the teacher is not paying attention? They go to YouTube, move around. It's very frustrating for me as a parent to be corralling them to do what they need to do. They're in 1st, 3rd, and 8th grades.
Oh gosh, that's so hard. Yes, I know. Well, I'll tell you some things that I've seen that don't work. So when we say to our kids, okay, you guys, just focus today. Do your best work. Come on, you can do this. Those, blanket statements tend not to work well for kids. But what tends to work better for kids is focusing on a subject or even 2 subjects. So you might say, to be honest, it's unrealistic that our kids are going to, a 1st, 3rd, and I think you said 7th grader are going to focus all day long. So we might narrow it down to a couple of subjects, and we might say, look, to the older student, what is the subject, or what are the 2 subjects that are most important right now? Either because you want to get a better grade, or maybe your child likes them. And the deal is, these are the subjects that you're going to put your most attention to. What could you do to focus during these 2 subjects? What could work for you? And asking your child the question. And they'll come up with all kinds of things. Well, I guess I could put my phone in the other room, or I think I could just eliminate all my open windows at the bottom of my screen. But narrowing the focus for kids works far better than having expectations, that they're going to be able to focus all day long. So I would start that. I might also separate them if they're distracting each other, if that's possible. And I would keep the younger kids within earshot of you, especially the 1st grader, because 1st graders just need more help than older kids.
Thank you. So mom is asking with regard to the site map that you talked about to organize materials. So what if the teachers are consistent with, for example, how to submit assignments? She said, I love the idea of the site map, but I think there are also inconsistencies within a single teacher or subject. So I'm not sure how the map would work. What might you recommend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just knowing that in the first place and listing out all the ways that teacher asks for assignments, because it's true. Sometimes teachers will say, upload the assignment. Sometimes teachers will say, email it to me. They have all different ways, but knowing that and just jotting it down is super helpful. It's also less taxing on your working memory to remember all the ways you need to submit assignment for 7 different teachers. There could be 21 ways. But kids keep all of that in their mind, in their working memory, and we want to just get it out. So it's not going to be perfect. I do understand that teachers have all different ways of doing things, but just putting anything like that down is super helpful.
Yeah. Middle schooler, how do you get your middle schooler to get enough sleep and stay awake during morning classes? Because they start, in Fairfax, middle school starts the 1st group. So
I saw that. Yes, I did see that bell change. Oh gosh, that's tough. You've probably heard this a million times from other people about winding down, but that's certainly true with screens. So if we can get our kids off screens, ideally, like at least an hour, 2 would be amazing. That can't always happen. But that's generally what keeps our kids up late at night is screens. So turning off Wi-Fi, saying in our house, everybody's devices have to go in this basket by 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever it is. And it's for everybody. You have to buy into it too. So you can't be over there on your iPad when you've told your child to put away their device. It's going to work better if everybody's in on it. That really helps kids wind down, because then they have to find something else to do. They can read a book. They can thumb through a magazine. They can look at comics. It doesn't matter. But those types of things help kids wind down. So that's what I might try. And you might even have like a negotiation some way. I like the blind eye strategy. A psychologist friend gave this to me. And my youngest son was a senior. He's a freshman in college now. He was a senior last year, and we had, like, there was friction about a few things, and I started using this blind eye strategy. And he would go to bed on time, but he sometimes would stay up late, and I'd say, look, I'm willing to turn a blind eye to you watching Netflix at night if you're willing to get up on time and be online on time for your first class. And he was like, deal. And when we had that deal, he was more willing to do those things in the morning. And that just kind of he just kind of naturally went to bed a little bit earlier. It may not work for a younger child because they don't have those self-reflective skills to think like that, but there could be some deal. Look, I'm willing to turn a blind eye on how long you play Roblox, but after school, however, you do need to put everything down by 8 o'clock, and it needs to go in that basket. So the blind eye strategy could work.
No, that's great. So we have a couple parents asking about the Chrome extensions that you recommended. Could you maybe just refresh our memory on those?
Sure, there's a couple. I mean, there's so many. There's so many that work great for kids, but Dayboard is one of them, and Dayboard is kind of like a to-do list. So anytime, this would be for older kids, not really for elementary kids. If you have a list of assignments that you want to work on, and maybe you don't want to put them all in Google Calendar, really that is the ideal place, that you're using the Google Suite to keep track of all your things, so they're all in one place. That's the best. But if you have a kid that just doesn't want to abide by those rules, Dayboard allows them to put in the things that they need to accomplish, and then every time they open up Chrome, they see the things that they have to do that they've put in there. The other one is called Stay Focused, and there's lots of them. So these are just a couple. There's probably like 12 really good website blocking apps, and it allows you to blacklist websites that you deem distracting. So your child would have to do this. It doesn't work if you do it because they'll get around it. Our kids are smart. So they'll say like, oh, I don't want to go to YouTube. I don't want to go to Reddit. And I don't want to go to Yahoo Fantasy Sports. And they set it for a specific amount of time. They might say for the next hour when I'm in my math class. And they can't get to those things, even if they disable the app or try to restart their computer. So that's how that works.
Awesome, thank you. So Mom actually made a suggestion and said, my second grade son, I guess he plays Legos or draws through class meetings or when he's waiting his turn, and the mom is asking, is that okay?
It is okay. In fact, there's research on doodling, which it sounds like what he's doing. And the researchers found that when people doodled as they were listening, they actually paid better attention than non-doodlers. So if you have a child, if they're a natural doodler, you'll know. Do they just kind of tend to draw pictures and jot down things when they're listening? They're a natural doodler, and that may be perfectly fine for them, and they might actually be more attentive that way. Some people are and some people aren't, but if they are, I'd be perfectly fine with it. I think it's okay.
No, thank you. Yeah. So another parent has said, my son is trying to memorize the multiplication tables. I tried to explain this will take time, but he discourages quickly since he doesn't get it the first couple of times. Any suggestions on how to support him?
Sure. I always try to, so when I used to teach multiplication facts to my students, and also just like a lot of kids that I've tutored over the years, I always made them rhyme. So the easiest way to do multiplication facts is start out with the doubles. So that's like 8 times 8, 6 times 6, 5 times 5, those types of things. And I had rhymes for everyone. So for example, 8 times 8, pizza at my door, 8 times 8 is 64. And so for each little fact, there was a rhyme, and that's how I got them to remember it because they loved it. They could, I'd say 6 times 6, pick up 6. 6 times 6, pick up 6 is 36. Actually, I didn't quite go like that, but something like that. I can't remember. It's been a while. And then what you can do is pick the twos, and the twos are really easy because you're just counting by twos. Then you do the fives, and the fives are easy because kids can always skip count by fives. So if you teach the things that are super easy first, it provides a framework for facts, and then that makes everything else really easy. Not really easy, but like there's strategies for nines, the finger strategy for nines. There's all kinds of fun strategies, and if you want to email me, I'm happy to put it together in writing and send it to you. And my email is Ann, A-N-N, @BC Tutoring.
Thanks, Ann. What are you seeing as the top 5 issues affecting high school students?
I'm seeing definitely two main issues. One is math, that kids are really struggling with math, especially if they're not naturally good math students, because they're kind of checked out, and because math goes at a pretty good clip where you learn something new each day, they're getting behind pretty quickly. So we're working with a lot of kids in high school math. The other thing I'm seeing is that kids are really struggling with executive function skills, and they're just lacking motivation. And so I've seen that elementary school kids have been better with this, that they've seemed more engaged than high school kids. High school kids have had the hardest time. And it's really that their teachers put things in different places. They don't always remember. And they're having a hard time just keeping track of all their due dates and getting everything done. So that's the biggest thing I've seen with high school students. I've also seen a lot of stress because high school students know that their grades matter more than ever, since so many colleges are test optional. And kids that, maybe had okay grades but a good test score, that test score doesn't really matter as much anymore. And so I've seen that kids realizing their grades are really important and feeling stressed about that too.
Yeah, no, definitely, for sure. So let's see. Oh, first grade daughter spends more time running over to me while I'm working versus doing her own work. She doesn't engage in the class and isn't interested in what is going on. She seems very bored. I'm not sure how to get her more interested.
I would set boundaries for her. So what I would do is take a red and a green piece of paper. If you have your own office, I'm thinking you might be working from home. And even if you're not, it doesn't matter. You want your own space. Your time to do things. So if you have your own office, get a green and a red piece of paper. If you don't have your own office, but maybe you work at a table, get something that's red and green. It could be a piece of paper, it could be 2 cups, it could be sticky notes, it doesn't matter. And you say to your daughter, look, when I have the red sheet on my door, that means I can't be bothered. I'm in the middle of something really important, and I want you to try to solve your problem on your own. However, when I have the green sheet on my door, that means come on in. I can help you with whatever you need. You can get fancy, and you can also put a yellow sheet, and the yellow sheet means knock first, and I'll let you know if I can help you or not. But the red light, green light system works great for elementary kids. You would have to practice with her first. So you don't want to say just one day, hey, I have this new system. If I have red, it means this. You want to say, okay, let's practice this. Let's pretend that you're struggling to get to know how to solve your addition problem, and I have red on my door. What do you do? And you're basically brainstorming all the options you have. She has to figure it out on her own. And that's going to be really helpful, that she's kind of forced to do a few things on her own. Obviously, you don't want to keep red on your door all the time, but for times that you need to get stuff done, I find that the red-green light system works great, and it really encourages independence in kids.
And thank you for that. And that was a reminder to me that actually you had that tip on the webinar that you did for us back in September, and some other tips that I think parents would really appreciate. Erica, if you don't mind, Erica is here with us from the PRC. I'm going to ask her to put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat box, because I would really highly recommend going and watching Ann's other workshop. But between this one and the first one, you are going to get so many amazing tips to help your students through their virtual learning. And Ann, we have one more question.
Sure.
All right, so let me go back and find it real quick.
And I'll also mention the red light, green light is in the ebook too.
Yes. Oh, good. Thank you. So any tips for a fifth grader with ADHD who just keeps wanting to go to YouTube? How do I get him to stop?
First, I would, yeah, you're not alone. First of all, I would make sure he's doing his work, his virtual school, in a public place. So that means, if you're working at a table in the kitchen, he can be at a desk in the kitchen. So it might be that he needs a little bit more oversight during virtual learning. I'd also start out again with that appointment in the conversation that, you're worried. You might say, I've noticed YouTube's been on a lot. And so that sounds a little bit better than you're watching YouTube too much. It's kind of blaming it on YouTube and not your child, and opening up the dialogue for that. But I'd also ask, about one of the blockers. Would one of these blockers be helpful to you? So I might have the conversation and brainstorm with him. What are all the ways? And if he says, it's not a problem, Mom, I think YouTube's great and I learn everything just like all the other kids, I would not be accepting of that. I would say, look, in our family, school is really important. And there are times for YouTube and there are times that aren't. So we need to come up with some type of solution for this. And it could also be that you pick the most important subjects. It could be that having such a drastic change to absolutely no YouTube isn't realistic. But you might say, during English, math, and science, for example, there's no YouTube. That might also be a good negotiation.
Oh, that's great. Hey, Ann, we had a couple more questions come in at the last minute
Sure.
here. So this one is, how do you get your child to do homework after school? When should they start homework? How much? For how long? Like, what would be acceptable, do you think?
If your child can do homework during school, if there's ever any periods of time where they can get this stuff done during school, I think that's really ideal. But if they absolutely can't, I would really look at their levels of energy. If you've tried to get them to do homework after school and it hasn't been successful, it's probably because they're in that trough that I talked about, like that 3 o'clock dip. And I would think more ahead to before dinner. So one strategy I found helpful for kids is before dinner, your job is to figure out what you have to do. So that means that maybe physically you lay out the 3 things you have to do, or you pull up the 3 things on your computer screen so you know what to do. So right after dinner, you have your marching orders. You know what you need to accomplish. That might be too late for some kids. It could be that, 5 o'clock before dinner, they don't just have the activities that they have to do, but they actually have to at least do 2 of them, something like that. But it could be that after school, you're just going to be fighting a losing battle because they're in that trough, and doing it a little bit later might be helpful. But again, for homework, I'd think of that Pomodoro method, about that 25 minutes on and 5 minutes off, because it may be all your child can tolerate given that they're online all day.
We did have a question about the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I encourage my child to keep his camera on? He turns it off as soon as I leave the room.
I would ask the teacher, is it okay if my child has his camera off? Because if she says it's fine, I honestly wouldn't worry about it. I found that so many kids are just feeling a lot of social anxiety around their camera. And it just doesn't make that big of a difference whether they have it on or not. Now, if the teacher says it absolutely has to be on, I may, have some negotiation with my child. I would bring it up in a conversation. I might also think about the classes that it's most important to have it on. Maybe it's reading. It's an English class because there's a lot of book discussion, and your teacher needs to see you. She wants to see you when you answer a question. So again, I would have a dialogue about it and then think about which classes really does he have to have it on, because he might not need to have it on in all classes.
All right. And one last, how do we teach elementary students to learn, like, what is important, like what's urgent that they get done, and then maybe what's not so urgent? How do we help them balance that?
This might be, depending on the grade of the elementary school student, I found a lot of success, and this is one thing that all of our executive function coaches use. I like this tool. It's called Must Do, Should Do, Could Do, and it's basically a way of categorizing assignments, because some kids just, again, they have a complete meltdown about all the stuff they have to do, and they see everything as equally important when it's not. So must do, so this would mean looking through the list of assignments and figuring out, all right, what's a must do? What's due the next day that I absolutely have to get done? What's the should do? That means, well, I should do it, but it's not due tomorrow, and it's not that big of a deal if I don't. And then could do, those are kind of like nice to haves. Well, I already studied for that science test. Do I need to study more? Maybe not. That could come off my list. So by categorizing the assignments, really you only have to tackle the must do. And that's a really good skill to have for kids. You'll have to do it with them the first few times. They have to practice it until they can do it on their own.
Well, Anne, thank you so much. This has been really terrific, and I think we learned a lot of new things tonight. And so thank you again for coming and doing this with the PRC and our families. And I would just remind our families, please, ask for Anne's ebook. If you are looking for other resources, as Anne suggested, we have so many at the Parent Resource Center. We would love to help you as well. And certainly you can email us or give us a call, and we would be happy to work with you. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Anne. And we look forward to our next time together.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Bye-bye.